You are listening to the OverFunctioning Leadership Podcast, learning leadership concepts through life experience. Welcome, friends, to another OverFunctioning podcast from OverFunctioning Leadership. I am Alex.
I'm John.
And I'm Zach.
And I just upset Zach very greatly because he didn't do his pregame clap of our podcast. I'm really...
My mojo's all messed up, but I'll push through.
Well, today we're going to be talking about tolerance. Specifically, do you have to have it to be a leader? Tolerance is thrown around a lot within our society and in a lot of different ways. And so we thought it'd be good to just kind of talk about that. What does that mean as a leader? Do I need to care about it? I don't know. So it'd be a good discussion, especially when it comes to all of our Bowen family systems theory. But before that, let's go ahead and recap our fun discussion when we had a guest, Adam Harder, come through, and we talked about pursuit and distance. So what was that like? What did we talk about? All those things.
It was a practical look at the spectrum of cutoff and fusion. And when
frogs.
And frogs. There were a lot of talks about frogs. We didn't have to censor a lot, but we could have had the opportunity to, if that tells you what the topic of conversation could have been. So it was just a very insightful, amphibious podcast.
Yeah, wait. So you were talking about what the conversation could have been censored. So if you listen to our last podcast, it's not on there.
It could have been censored if we had gone into certain topics of conversation that were close at hand.
But that's not on the last podcast.
But it is not.
Okay, got it.
Right. It is safe for children.
Yes.
As with all of our other podcasts. Eating up.
Well, so we encourage you strongly to go listen to that. iTunes, Google Play. We'll mention those things later. But we are going to move into a little fable time. So, do a nice little foot soak. Maybe get some exfoliate with yourself. Get a cashmere robe on.
And some Dreft. Put some Dreft in that water.
Oh,
Some
Epsom
what?
salt. What the heck
Dreft.
Spell that real quick.
Dreft.
Okay.
Dreft.
What is Dreft?
Dreft is... You guys are too young. This is soap that people would put in to soak their feet. There was a picture of it was pink box with a baby hugging a blanket on the front cover. So some of my older listeners.
Oh, they're going to really enjoy
Dreft, yes.
the Dreft. Okay, well, anyways, I actually have the fable today. It's kind of a teacher-based fable, but we were all in school at one point in time, so this would be pretty applicable. So, especially when it comes to tolerance. So, I had a student early on who I knew that he cheated on this test, and it was during class. So, he took the test outside of my room, and I knew he cheated on the test. Another teacher told me to, so I had 2 against 1 kind of deal. And so, I was just like, hey, buddy, can we chat after class and we need to talk about your test? He's like, why? And I'm like, well, you cheated. And so, it's standard flair usually for teachers, and, law enforcement usually is to not tolerate things such as cheating and murdering and stuff. So I don't tolerate cheating around here, so we're going to have to talk, And so he stood up. I think he said F you to me, Fun United, or, I don't know. What a couple of things.
Frivolous upholstery?
Yeah. Yes, that's what he was thinking of. Anyways, and he ran out of my room. That's the only kid that's ever went to the principal's office in my 9 years of teaching that I've ever sent to the principal's office. He took himself there, so I'm not exactly sure. Right. I actually took him there.
He's a willing participant.
That doesn't count for you, I don't think.
No. No, but overall, I think when it comes to tolerance, since we're going there, is that he would have tolerated that we allow cheating. And I think in a lot of ways, there's actually movies. What are the movies that there's like one night of tolerance of we're going to allow you to do whatever you want? The Purge?
Yeah, The Purge.
They have a movie, John. I know you're really into movies.
Yes.
They actually have, I think there's a Purge 1 and a Purge 2.
I don't know.
I don't know. We're just purging everything.
I know it's a trope in TV now. TV shows that are of a more frivolous nature maybe sci-fi will use that as in this episode we encountered a group of people that once a year slaughters everyone or does whatever evil thing to their heart's desire and there's no consequences.
Yeah, so there's We allow you to do whatever you like. So, we tolerate everything. So, and we're going to get into that here in a little bit. So overall, we're going to be looking at that overall question of, do you need to be tolerant as a leader? Or what does that mean to be a leader and have tolerance? And so let's jump right on there. Zach, what are your first initial thoughts?
Well, based off of your fable, the first thing that pops into my head is what's the difference in tolerance levels between an authority figure and a peer? As an authority, I was actually just reading earlier today. Richard Nixon, around the time, he's the Watergate scandal guy, right? Right,
is.
and he puts out this press release, and he says he lets some people go or something along those lines, where he ends up saying in this press release, you need to hold your president to the highest standard because even if it wasn't him who committed those actions, he is the one who's responsible for the people who are in that position as the leader. And so their actions, cascade back up to him. And so you need to make sure that you're holding them to the highest level of accountability, of moral accountability. And I thought that was interesting, especially looking at our current political climate where that's been a major criticism of Trump. And so the question then is, what are we to tolerate in authority figures? What do authority figures tolerate of those below them? And does that vary if it's a peer? I know you guys are teachers, so cheating, right?
No.
You as a teacher don't tolerate cheating, but me as a peer, I might know that my friend Jim is, plagiarizing online, and I could take one of two stances. I could care about it and rat him out, or I could just be like, that's Jim. Hope the teacher doesn't catch him.
I think the question is there a reasonable expectation on the part of one person to enforce the rule of law or order? And I think in the teacher's standpoint or a police officer standpoint, there's an expectation in the functioning of a healthy society or a healthy academic environment that rules have to be enforced. But I think where there's peers involved, where there's not an expectation that one enforces policies, then I think, offering thoughts and insights, but letting Jim be Jim and deciding what Jim wants to do on his own may be the better option.
Yeah, and then tolerance overall, just so our listeners have an idea. So tolerance, what we're talking about here is the overall definition when it comes to accepting of other people's thoughts, even though I don't necessarily agree with them. And so is that the baseline? Is that it? Like I think of there's a tagline that we had in high school. One of our groups we had a speaker come in, and his tagline was "Live and let live," and I think that speaks directly to tolerance in a lot of ways. I think that's exactly what he talked about because he had almost a disability and whatever. But that's what we're looking at, right? When we talk about tolerance.
Well, is it a moral thing or isn't it? I think one of the questions at play here is, what is this founded on? What is the objective of tolerance? Am I tolerating your actions in measure with my moral qualms? Do I look at you and say cheating is morally wrong, and so that is the basis for my expectation? Or am I saying, man, Jim's annoying, I'm going to get him for something, And that's not the best example. Outside of the cheating example, am I not tolerating someone because they're obnoxious or annoying? Because that's a subjective thing. Mm-hmm. And I know Bowen apparently never talked directly about self-soothing, but he does talk about leaning into the situations that make you uncomfortable and objectively looking at your tendencies and your intentions in those more anxious, more uncomfortable situations so that you have a better objective understanding of yourself and hopefully the ability to better interact in those scenarios in the future.
This tolerance question gets thrown around, I feel like, or just the word itself gets thrown around somewhat loosely or quite often within social circles, especially when it comes to diversity within our society. And so, as you talked about whether it's subjective or not, then is diversity, when it comes to tolerance, is diversity subjective then?
Well, I think certainly diversity of opinion.
Yeah.
So people see a situation, differently. Maybe it's some on this side, some on that side. I'm just thinking through so this is the OverFunctioning podcast, and our podcast is about leadership.
Yeah.
And John Maxwell, who's the author of a number of leadership books, defines leadership as influence. And so our opening question was, does one, to be an effective leader, do you need to be tolerant? I think to be an effective leader, it's hard to influence people if they're moving away from you, as Ed Friedman would say. So the question of, does a leader have to be tolerant? My question is, what type of behavior can I have, or any of us have, that want to be a good leader, that causes people to move toward us? And whatever that answer is, I think that's the behavior to consider, and figure out where tolerance falls in that moving toward or moving away from the leader.
Or maybe it's choosing not to move with regard to certain opinions. Because we've talked about pursuit and distance, and as a leader, if you're pursuing whatever the mob wants, per se, right? You're in a highly reactive system. You got a bunch of people, they're talking, they're getting all riled up. You don't necessarily want to just submit to their demands, not simply on the basis that it's a mob of people. You want to make an informed, rational decision about what to do next. And so maybe tolerance is choosing to hear that opinion and then not doing anything about it while providing explanation. And that might cause people to distance themselves from you, right? But that in itself, I guess, might pull more informed, more thoughtful people towards you. I just struggle with what you were saying, John, about people seeking after you. How does that work in that specific sense?
Well, I think if you're curious about, so when I think of the word tolerance, I think, okay, somebody's got a different opinion than me, and I'm going to put up with it and not judge them. I'm not going to criticize them. I'm not going to argue with them. But I think by just putting up with an opinion and not saying anything and kind of biting my tongue, I don't really think that's very influential behavior at all. What I think can be effective is to engage that person in conversations that are about something else, to figure out something that we have in common that may not be about that particular issue where we have a disagreement. And then through that relationship being strengthened, then it might be able to withstand the thornier question that brings an issue. I can think back to our country's founding and how there was some discussion early in our country's history around the Constitution time of whether or not slavery should be banned. And the framers of the Constitution believed that the country was not strong enough to tackle the issue of slavery. And so they chose to kind of put it off to the side and address it later on. And of course, we know how that turned out. But it's the idea that if an issue is so contentious between people, I would encourage the leaders in our audience to not make that the issue. There's other things to talk about, and perhaps come back and address that issue later on when there's been some sense of, closeness that has maybe increased between two people.
Yeah, because that's going to allow them to accept what you're saying.
Or be more open versus
be
closed.
More open to what, yeah, because otherwise I can think of, I've talked to a couple of different principals. I'm going for my principal licensure, and I'm hoping to be a principal in a couple of years. And I've had a couple of principals tell me, your first year, try not to do too much. Maybe that's part of what we're talking about here is that you're, in a way, we're using this word, I guess, because it's what we're talking about, but tolerate some things. And I don't know how much I agree with all of that, but there is something in play of saying, this year I'm going to make a lot of connections, and then I'm going to work with these people to come up with something that's going to remedy some of these issues that I'm seeing. Yeah.
Well, I think that's an interesting point. We have this connotation of tolerance being negative. And I can understand that when we're talking about cheating, moral issues, and typically the infringing of my morals and what I believe to be right and wrong through your actions. I understand that that's typically a negative thing. You're not going to tolerate someone who's doing things that are perfectly in line with what you believe or think, right? Your guiding principles. On the other side, though, they have those rule of thumbs out there. You go to a BuzzFeed poll and it says, how is your relationship doing? And they're asking you all these rando questions. But if you're looking at measures of good relationships, at least of a romantic capacity, one indicator I've heard used is how many positive interactions to negative interactions do you have with a person. And so if I were to say, I have this kid named Jeff at work, and man, I have to tolerate the crap out of him, I'm going to engage Jeff every time thinking of him as something negative to be endured. And I might, especially from a leadership context, if I'm going to approach someone who I'm trying to lead and I'm only tackling the issues that I'm trying to tolerate, aren't most of my interactions going to be negative?
Yeah, I think you're right.
So
go ahead.
So you need to intentionally pursue positive interactions with the people you feel as if you're tolerating. I think that's got to be some level of this curiosity thing.
Well, I think about connecting on a human level. Whatever the opinions and thoughts that another one has, even if I disagree with them, if we can appreciate them as a person and where they're coming from, I think that can soften militancy and make one open to different perspectives.
I hear this thrown around, especially in relationships. And I'm sorry if I keep coming back to this, but what are you willing to live with? I hear that quite a few times. What does that mean? You know what I mean? I'm just trying to, what does that mean? I can see why that can sound kind of negative, like, oh, I'm just going to
put up with it.
I'm just going to put up with this.
I mean, we talk about anxiety. That seems like you're turning up some sort of background buzz level of anxiety that's just constantly going to be there. And as we know in anxiety, that has to be distributed either to a level that it goes outside of the immediate system, the immediate triangle, or it's just going to amp up whatever's currently in there.
Yeah, I think about being responsible to somebody versus for somebody. I think sometimes if we're intolerant or if we force ourselves to tolerate someone and, gosh, they're driving us crazy and I can't believe they think this way, I wonder what gave us the idea or belief that we should think for somebody else. I mean, I think you can have really strong beliefs about a certain topic and at the same time allow another to freely think something different. I think self-differentiation is the path to get there, where you are calm enough, and the phrase I can remember that comes from, I think Roberta Gilbert talks about this in one of her books, but to believe in your principles enough to be calm for them. So believe your position. I think that's actually the exact quote is that, but same idea. Believe your position enough to be calm for it, and versus trying to be shrill and convince somebody that you're right, because that just causes people to run away.
I was watching an episode of Brooklyn Nine-Nine the other night, and one of the jokes was, you have the respect of the people that you're leading over if you can take a pause and they're still engaged during that gap. And that's sort of like a funny thing. You're not shouting at them. You're not demanding their attention, but they're giving it to you regardless of, especially because of the way in which you maintain and hold yourself.
Yeah, and I've heard that same thought of that a leader in an organization does not have to be physically present to actually have an impact. That the strongest leaders in an organization, their presence, their actual physical presence, matters less and less the more the organization approves of and supports their leadership, just because they've earned that respect. I think there's truth to that.
Do you have something you want to say?
No, go ahead.
Because I want to twist this a little bit back to relationships, because a common thing that I hear is that compromise is loss. which I think is interesting. And they make a distinction, and I don't know what reputable sources I'm pulling this from, but I only use reputable sources.
Of course.
But they make this distinction between compromise and resolution. And I'm thinking about the fights that I have with my girlfriend or with people in my life, and I feel least anxious or frustrated after when I've seen that they're on they're acting on some sort of well thought out principle. I often feel worse when I feel like we've come to some sort of compromise because I've actively guided their behavior in such a way that I'm not sure I can trust that they will behave in the way that we've compromised after the fact, especially if I'm not present. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's interesting. It's almost like you're fighting for that win-win. That word drives me crazy when people are like, well, we've got to have a win-win here. Well, sometimes it's going to be win-lose. Sorry. It's just, the last time I checked, a win-win is a tie, which is like kissing your sister.
Which is like a participation trophy.
But that makes a lot of sense with this compromise. You had something, John.
Well, I was just thinking of the example that you gave of when you compromise, someone's kind of giving in and they're almost borrowing self from you and making a decision just to placate you versus a decision that comes in that person from within that they really stand behind and believe, and they're likely to stick to that decision.
Yeah, it's an over-functioning on some sort in addition to that borrowing of responsibility because I'm pushing my views onto someone else. But those times where I take the effort, because it's turning something that's chronic and making it acute. That's what confrontation is. And so when I go that step to fully say my opinion and to fully present my thoughts and understanding behind something, and the other person does the same while showing that they've heard my side, regardless of whether we've come to a common conclusion or not at the end, I think I do feel better because I know that they have this firm belief in what they're doing and why they're doing it. And so it, from a systems theory standpoint, it's created a homeostasis as compared to that borrowing of self that I know I can't trust.
Yeah, so I want to go to the spectrum, the well-known spectrum that we have of our fusion and our cutoff spectrum. Does tolerance on the cutoff end, is tolerance, can it go on the spectrum, I guess? Like if you're like, I'm going to tolerate whoever, it's almost like I'm just going to not cut them off in some ways. Just be like, okay, that's fine. I just, whatever,
Tolerance goes smack dab in the middle.
Oh, yeah?
I believe it does. I believe that I can, as I become more grounded in my belief and more sure of what I think for me, then I can stay connected to others without trying to change them. So I can be connected yet still separate. And I just really believe that as a leader becomes more self-differentiated, and again, we've used that term a number of times, but to be clear for our listeners that may be here for the first time, it's this notion of I've really thought carefully of what I believe. I'm a calmer person. I'm more thoughtful, and because of that, the beliefs and the thoughts and the opinions that other people have that I think might be half-cocked or just incorrect, let them be them and I'll be me, and we can have a conversation. And I think that is the best avenue for healthy relationships, for peace in both parties, for the conversation to actually continue versus stop. And so I think it's in the middle of staying connected yet separate.
And that's such a good way to lead by example and to promote self-differentiation, because the people who aren't self-differentiated, I imagine, have come from places where they have someone else's identity being forced upon them. You're going to behave this way, you're going to believe this, you're going to act this way, you're going to do these things. And when you say, I am okay with you doing you as long as you understand the consequences of that, I want you to truly consider and think through what your actions mean and understand that they're a part of your identity to some capacity, that's the promotion of self-differentiation.
And it's not a my side, your side.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it. Intolerance is going to be that. It's going to be the other end of it. Of you're either with me or against me. It's that not mama mentality, but
I mean, a little
it's
bit.
black and white, and it's the crowd. You're going with the crowd, and you see this a lot on social media. You're either for this or against this, and it's either a thumbs up or a thumbs down. There's not like a middle thumb in there. So actually, I haven't checked my emojis yet. Is there a middle thumb?
I mean,
Where it's like the
Yeah,
gladiator thumb.
I think
he's
there is.
deciding whether or not he's going up or down.
and in true gladiatorial style, doesn't down actually mean they survive? What does that say about how backwards our society is? Sorry, upside down.
Thumbs downing everybody. I believe that was a Yankees thing, wasn't it? Wasn't that like last? Anyways, it doesn't really matter. Oh, by the way, and I apologize. I know you have a thought.
I just have a question.
Okay, this is episode 24.
Jack Bauer.
There we go. Okay. Anyways.
So, can there be absolute truth and tolerance? Can there be absolute truth and tolerance? Or does the notion of tolerance mean that there is no truth? That one person's belief is true, another person believes this is true, and all viewpoints are equal? I think the resistance to the tolerance movement among some is about that what I'm hearing is that there is no absolute truth, therefore I reject tolerance. And I'm wondering if can be absolute truth that's true for all people at all times and is unchanging, and then also can it coexist next to tolerance?
I think that's interesting because I love spectrums. And is this something that's objective or subjective with regards to your spectrum? So wherever you place your belief on the spectrum, and we think of a good example of something that you might be needing to be tolerant of. The sky's blue. Flat Earth. I was,
There we go. The old flat Earth.
Just reading today that they don't believe that Australia exists.
No, okay.
That all the pilots are in on this conspiracy, and if you've ever been to Australia, it's a pilot taking you to somewhere else that is inhabited by actors. So, I mean, neither here nor there.
Okay.
But,
All right.
But
Well, I think sometimes in political environments, there can be a difficult time tolerating the viewpoints of another. I think that's an example.
and so you throw that onto some sort of spectrum, and you say, how far from this am I willing to not take action against, or maybe not continually take action against? In the sense that if I'm basing the standard on me, that's an inherently reactive position. And I imagine that you're pretty narrow in what you're willing to tolerate because you're going to cut off from those relationships because you are the standard. But if you can remove that standard from outside of yourself in some capacity, say not I deserve to pursue happiness, but everyone who's a human deserves to pursue happiness, then at what point is your threshold for taking action, and at what point is your threshold for just understanding that regardless of someone's belief or adherence to that principle, that it still remains a truth?
And if you care so much, what are you willing to do about it then? If this is the absolute and you care so much about whatever it is, are you willing to take those extra steps to say, you know what, I believe this is absolutely true, and you have a different viewpoint, and I'm okay with that. But you know what, I believe in this so much that I just need to tell you about it. You know what I mean? There's a portion of that. So are you willing to go an extra step, buddy? Be curious with them, and and understand their viewpoints in a way that you're not giving them advice, because we know advice is, and shouting things at them. And maybe you're just willing to walk through a relationship with somebody, and that's the long play, and it's really hard to do on a Facebook post.
I want to re-swizzle this maybe, and Alex, tell me if this is accurate to what you were just saying, but could you rephrase it back into a realm of responsibility? If it's an absolute truth and someone is professing it's an absolute truth, you should have some level of personal responsibility for yourself, right? Your own responsibility to adhere to that truth in whatever way it manifests itself. But if it's an absolute truth, then don't you also relinquish your right to responsibility for that, for the communal, societal responsibility side of that? Because it will exist regardless of whether you play a part in that or not.
John's looking at me like, I don't know. I don't know if I can answer that question. What are you thinking? I mean, obviously this is your...
I don't know. I'm trying to find a good example for that.
No.
I think that all guns should be taken away. I don't think that really bears some sort of absolute truth, a right to own weapons or something. I don't know how universal that is, semi-automatics or whatever. But I do believe to the right to life, and I think most people would say they have a right to their own life. And so I feel as if I have a personal responsibility for myself to live that out. And depending on that, I have a social, communal responsibility to, if I truly believe that, seek out places where that is being infringed, say in the Middle East, or and to seek to live that out through my actions.
So it sounds like we're kind of going around this.
Yeah.
And this is what I feel like I'm hearing, is that it's easier to tolerate people when you know who they are. Right? You've had a relationship with these people. You understand their backgrounds. I know for me, it makes a lot more sense if I know who you are and I know why you believe the way that you believe things. It's a lot easier for me to understand what's going on. And that's a big picture. When we talk about leadership stuff, we're talking about that's getting up in the tree, seeing things from a different angle and saying what's going on with this person and why are they believing it this way, and just saying, okay, and I'm okay with that. And then you can understand a little bit behind what's going on with them. And so if they come very visceral and very in your face about you have to believe this, man, why? What's behind that? What is going on to why they want you to be so tolerant about whatever? Maybe there's some sort of familial background history, generational, definitely with a lot of these things that we're talking about. But so then you start to understand, and then you can become tolerant of what's going on and not being so reactionary, and have a good response and ask a lot of questions. That is a long, long road. And it's just whether or not, are you willing to take that long road, or are we just going to go ahead and jump over and take the shortcut? That's what I'm hearing. And tell me if I'm wrong or different. Or
yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think that's winning the battle versus winning the war, if you will. Maybe the battle's the issue of tolerance. Maybe the war is more about trying to get someone to move toward you so you can influence them and have a conversation, not so you can then win them over with the idea that finally, but one has to discover the beliefs and thoughts on their own. I really think that's true.
Yeah, and those people with those strong convictions and them being open and honest with people with those convictions and allowing, I always think of a picture of an open hand or a closed hand. Are they open to listen to you?
Right.
Those people are so attractive. So people are magnetized to them. And so you have a lot more influence that way. And that's where we started this conversation off with it. Maxwell, do you have influence or not?
Yeah, and I was just thinking, taking this onto a personal, reflective level. If I'm a leader and I'm looking at myself and I'm finding a person who is just the representation of something that needs tolerance. Am I magnetized towards that that as the centerpiece of our relationship? Do I triangle that and make that the poster child of my relationship with that person? Or can I maintain the ability to relate to someone outside of making that their perceived identity?
Yeah, so it's not based off of sort of subject.
Yeah.
It's based off of what's going on with
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are they that issue to you,
Mm-hmm.
or are they a person that you can interact with
That's huge.
outside of that?
That's huge. They're not that label then.
Right? Are they a project you're trying to
Oh, gosh.
win over
Yeah.
versus a human being?
Yeah, for sure. So, Zach, do you have anything else? I think it'd be a good time to wrap this up.
Final thought
Yeah.
is so a lot of this comes down to your own ability to react. If you want to be that person that can show you believe something, that you have an open hand and you're willing to weigh other possibilities against what you're currently holding, then that requires a very rational mindset. It requires the ability to not instinctively clench your fist around whatever you believe.
Shake
And
it.
so are you able to self-soothe, and are you putting yourself in situations that require you to look at your current behaviors and say, this is how I react, and I need to work against that?
So overall,
I'd say don't be a jerk. Tolerate people and think carefully about what you believe. And from there, peace flows. And I really think that's true. And you connect with people.
yeah, tolerant, self-differentiated. Become more self-differentiated overall, and you'll become more tolerant.
It's not a technique. It just naturally comes from that.
Yeah. So good luck with that. No, I mean, this is a lifelong journey. And I think Bowen says that everybody on a scale of, 0 to 100, 100, I don't think people actually get there. Most people are around 40, I think. And then if you get up to 50, 60, you're doing great. And then you have like the virtuosos who are like
There's
70.
one or two people who
In like 100
regularly
years,
exist
yeah.
in the 70, 80, and then
Yeah.
there's no one who's above that.
Yeah. So, well, great discussion, gentlemen, about tolerance. This podcast and our other podcasts can be found on iTunes and Google Play, Simplecast, YouTube, all those awesome places. You can also email us at theofpodcast@gmail.com. That is theofpodcast@gmail.com. You thought I was going to go OF, but I said THE.
Oh. I don't really care that much. So, in addition to that, we had a guest on our last episode, and do you think you have something to offer? We would love to showcase your value. Ask us a question, we'll answer it, or submit an application, aka say, I want to be on your podcast, and we'll add you to the long queue that we have of people who are just dying to be a part of this.
We'll immediately send you a Google form. Just a long laundry list of check boxes and short answer questions.
We're seeing how badly you want it.
Yeah.
So
Who hurt you? Who hurt you most recently? Who hurt you the most?
and who have you heard?
Who's your favorite member of the podcast?
Yeah, that's gonna be big for Zach.
Big, huge. I live and die by people's approval of me. Not tolerant to any sort of dislike.
Excellent.
Yeah, Misha is an answer if you like to. She could be your favorite, or Priscilla is also another fan favorite. So, or Adam. Hey, or his frogs. There are lots of people here that you could talk. Or including Jim. And I know Freddie makes a lot of appearances.
He does.
Freddie's around. Franz has been around as well.
Franz
So,
has been around.
All these identities, just hard to juggle.
Well, with that, I think that's going to close us up. I'm Alex.
I'm John.
And I'm Zach.
And we'll see you next time.
Tolerate you next time.
See you around.